Welcome back to today's episode. As we close out of October, having reviewed shows like Goosebumps and The Fall of the House of Usher, it only seems right to remain in the horror genre while discussing Netflix's new limited series, Bodies. The first episode of this British mystery thriller, You're Already Dead, runs 55 minutes, introduces multiple timelines, a handful of main characters, and a conspiracy by an ominous group with a portentous catchphrase, Know You Were Loved. But before we delve into the story, was that DC Comics that I saw credited in the intro?
Yes, they produced the graphic novel back in 2015.
And so by episode 3, I should expect to see Batman and Superman jump into here and start kicking some ass.
Different universes, but I was surprised.
Wait, different universes?
Yes, because I'm surprised to hear you say that it's horror, because I read the whole graphic novel, and I didn't get horror. I got more of what you were talking about with the other genres, mystery,
You're
thriller.
right. But like Netflix released this in mid-October, and if you just saw the title, Bodies, and you saw that the first episode was called You're Already Dead, and it just kind of had a sinister backing. There are dead people in the show, but it is more of a mystery. It's definitely not the same thing as The Fall of the House of Usher, which I've been keeping up on, and that is just a bloody mess.
Well, maybe we're going to talk about the dead body really fast, because in the comics, at least for the first issue, and I think the issues are like 8 for the graphic novel, same amount of episodes for this.
Have you read them?
Yes, I read the full graphic novel for it yesterday.
I missed that. Oh, okay, wow, yeah. Okay.
And so it's the same dead body that pops up in 4 different timelines, at least for the first issue of the comic. Is that the same way with this show?
Yeah, we're jumping into it because, like, in the first few minutes, I thought this just took place in the present. It's 2023. You got Detective Sergeant Shahara Hassan. She's a Muslim single mom, hard worker. She's at this, like, alt-right rally that's working to, like, prevent the protesters from going nuts. She notices this kid is just staring, and then she's, like, suspicious about that, and then she sees he has a gun, runs through the alleyways trying to catch him. He leads her into, I guess, this place called Long Harvest Lane, and that's where the dead body shows up, right?
Yeah, so this is very much like the first scene of the comics. The only difference is this was 2014, and again, the graphic came out in 2015.
So they moved it up.
So, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the 2023 storyline, and then suddenly we're going into the past. So that was cool. And all the transitions into the past were cool because I didn't know how many we were going to get. So 1941, so suddenly you're in Nazi Europe. There's bombs going off in England. Detective Charlie Whiteman, he's Jewish, got a pencil mustache. He's a womanizer. He habitually, like, flicks a lighter. That's his, like, back in the day, neo-noir type thing. He's actually a double agent. He doesn't just work for the police. He's following orders from the shadow agency, and they actually tell him to go pick up a body in the same lane that Detective Sergeant Shahara Hassan has just. And one thing that happens before Hassan finds the body during the protest was that all the lights went out. Like an EMP, like an electromagnetic pulse had, like, taken them all out.
Yep.
Same thing happens in 1941. It's really rainy and dark, so you can't really tell, but all the lights burst, and then he goes into this alley to pick up the body, and he stows it in the back, but it's the same body.
Yes.
And then we get transported back to 1890.
I just wanted to jump in really fast. You said it was 1941. That's the second time change from the comics, which was 1940.
Is 1890 at least the same?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, we had Detective Inspector Alfred Hillinghead. At this point, you know what's going on. They're all coming across this body in Long Harvest Lane. The body itself has several features that are specific to it, so you know it's the same dude, I guess. He's got a wrist tattoo with 3 lines and then, like, a cross at the bottom of it, a hole in his left eye, a laceration on his forehead. He's been drained of blood, so either he was killed somewhere else or someone, like Dexter style, turned him upside down and just drained him before they put him there. And he's got no bullet in his brain. So this Alfred guy in 1890, Alfred Hillinghead, he's a detective inspector as opposed to a detective sergeant. I think it's just the difference in time periods, and maybe that's how they were distinguishing each other. Beard, top hat, he's friends with a pathologist. They actually show you the pathology report being done at the same time in 2023 with the autoptician there.
Oh, it's a side-by-side
Yeah, it's a panel thing. And so you're able to learn that the guy does not have a bullet in his head, so they're not exact. He obviously died that way, but there's no exit wound. So they're very curious as to how exactly it happened. The thing is, in the present timeline, Shahara is led to believe that the kid that she was chasing may have shot him. However, she is actually sympathetic to the kid because he seemed really nervous. He ran away afterwards, and his name was Saeed. And so the entire episode, her plot is to find him with the rest of the police force before someone else does and kills him.
This is very much like the comic, and I'm surprised because when we've done other comics such as Paper Girls or American Born Chinese, twists in those comics, I remember you say, are given away within the first episode, or things that happen issues later are brought up in the first episode. But here it seems like this is pretty faithful adaptation.
Source material.
Very, very much so. Like, all this stuff that you're talking about happens in issue 1 of the series, which I guess makes sense because, like I said, 8 issues from the graphic novel, 8 episodes. Maybe they're just going like panel by panel or something like that. Because the symbol that you're talking about as well on his arm, the three lines and then the cross, that is definitely from the comics as well.
Yeah, they keep showing it. The events that precede finding the body and the ongoing investigations aren't necessarily uniform throughout the time periods, but certain things remain the same. So the body remains the same, the lights bursting remain the same, the fact that they're all police officers remain the same, but like how the investigations turn out, they're all different. So as I said, Shahara spends her time trying to find Saeed. They find out that he has a sister, and so that they go through her, and because she's also Muslim, Shahara uses that connection to gain her trust. Then he contacts her, Saeed does. They meet at a mall later on that day, and or it could be the next day. And then that's where he kind of commits suicide. Because at first...
He commits suicide?
Yeah, so he shows up with a gun, and at this point they have a trace on her phone, which she's used to contact him. She sits down with him. They have a little chat. He tells her there's a lot of stuff she doesn't understand, but he had to lead her to that body. And then he stands up, pulls out his gun, and you can tell that he wants the cops to shoot him. But then she saves him, and then he's like, I still have to die, and he pulls out the gun and shoots himself in the face.
All right, so that's a little... That does not happen.
Yeah. Saeed is basically there to warn her that, like, she has just stumbled upon something that is not a normal thing. It's a science fiction thing. She may end up time traveling. I don't know what, but, like, he is there to kind of be like, this is fate. You were meant for this one mission in your life, and now you have started it.
Sounds like he was there to kind of exposition.
And everybody gets sort of a warning, except with Saeed's, he starts it off by being like, I shouldn't have brought you into this. But then later on, he's like, I had to bring you in on this. So in 1941, right, Charlie Whiteman, the same guy who was hired to, or not hired, but told to pick up the body, so he knew it was already going to be there, he sticks it in the back of his car, and he's transporting it in the dead of night, but because there's an anti-Semitic other colleague of his, they pull him over, and they're about to check the trunk, but that's when the Germans decide to start bombing England and London again, and so he gets blown up.
So that's how the explosion happens, because there's an explosion in issue 1, but it's definitely not just like war suddenly breaks out of nowhere.
The funny thing about it, though, is that Charlie obviously had something against this dude. He had a grudge against the guy, and he's put in charge of the investigation to find out how he died. Because, like, Charlie gets the hell out of there, and he's not able to get the body out of the trunk. So he just leaves. The next morning, when the detectives are all around there, they put him in charge of the investigation. And they're like, you have to figure out. So he opens the trunk himself, and he's like, oh, my God, there's a dead body in here. And then he gets a call that says the people who told him to get rid of the body, they were like, no, you were loved. They were really pissed off that the police now know about this body. So that's his warning of like, oh shit, you fucked up.
So yeah, at the end of the first issue, Charlie in 1941, the explosion happens, and then he just sees that the body is there. He didn't know about it prior to, I guess, him picking it up. And
he didn't go to Long Harvest Lane and pick up that body?
No, he didn't know about it. He just kind of was like, oh, suddenly there's a dead body here, and that's how it ended. We haven't touched upon one timeline, right?
Well, we're still talking about the 1891, because that one also exists. We have Alfred. He spends the episode obsessing over this gay journalist who was taking pictures of the body when the police found him. And so Alfred ends up arresting this guy under suspicion of either conducting the murder, but also for taking pictures of gay people,
well,
including himself. And then he gets the warning later on that the image that the guy took of the dead body, there's a reflection in the image of a different person, and that's going to be his main lead, Alfred's main lead.
So that's the hint that he's given.
But the pathologist recognizes the guy, and he's like, just pretend you never saw this. You never want to speak to this guy. Drop this investigation quick. So there's Alfred's warning. However, the homosexual plot line where it was like that's illegal back then, like there's a lot to get into with that, but it does feel like in 1890 you've got the queer storyline, in 1941 you've got anti-Semitism, in 2023 it's Islamophobia, and also like police being bad because they got itchy trigger fingers.
Yeah.
So a lot of social messaging.
But that's all from the comic.
Is it? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, they definitely don't ignore it here. And unfortunately to me, I feel like even though it might have existed in the source material, they lay it on pretty thick. But I think the storyline that you're talking about is what they save for the very end of the episode, where, again, I was expecting 2023. When 1941 showed up, I was like, oh, okay, we get 2 storylines. When 1890 popped in there, I was like, oh my God, wow, there's 3 here. And then when 2053 came along at the very end of it, I was pretty floored. Like, I honestly didn't think that they were going to give us another storyline, particularly since you've got Iris here, and she finds the body in the same way. She calls it in, but then the body wakes up. The guy's still alive.
Oh, that's actually a lot different than the first issue. He's still dead in the first issue of the comics.
Yeah.
So wait,
2053, he's still alive.
Just really fast, how do they portray 2053? Like, what do they have, like, text saying it, or is it?
Oh, of course they have the text saying it. But it's the defining feature of 2023 is that you have talking Teslas and terrible haircuts. Like, you barely get a chance to see it. So it's only like 3 minutes of 2053. Technology is like front and center, but you can also tell this is on a budget. And also the haircut of this lady is just the style does not make any sense. It looks so bad. They gave her like a bowl cut, and there's no way in that like half a bowl cut. There's no way that that's going to be the future. So I was immediately put off by that. But she finds the body, the guy wakes up, and it's a shock for everybody. And I can get into my pros and cons now, but is that the way that the graphic novel, like the first issue, ended?
Well, no. The first issue ended with the 1941 or the 1940 storyline.
Okay, so they went through a few issues.
Yes, the thing that I thought was coolest about the graphic novel, and it doesn't seem like the show was maybe able to replicate, was that every single different time that they switched, it had a different style.
No. Of course they were. So my pros. I want to get in my pros.
Okay,
All right, so the transition between the timelines was slick. The fact that I told you it was a surprise every time. The introductions and then the parallel scenes where we got to see both autopsies happening at the same time. And then like every time that we saw the body get found and the lights explode and stuff like that before that, it's like, let's do this again. Let's try this again. Just straight up from Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially by the 2053 one, because you knew exactly what was going to happen. But then he popped up and he was alive. So that was what was cool about that.
Are you introduced to Bounce in 2053?
What?
Bounce.
A Bounce.
There's a character named Bounce that I think, I'm not surprised that you weren't introduced to them because it seemed like when I read the kind of the summary for this episode, they aren't going to be in the show, but they were such a big part of 2053's storyline. They were a little kid.
Yeah, I think that it was like a teaser for what 2053 is going to become. I think episode 2 is going to go crazy into it. The contrast between the timelines, which is what you were just addressing, between the visual color filters, the sound and audio that they decided to keep for those time periods, the props, the building, the CGI/sets, they recreated the same area. This is what they had to do because they had to keep on finding the body, but then they had to keep on changing it just enough so that there's that gap of time wherever from the future or the past to still make it recognizable but also set it apart. 4 different times. The street lamps kept changing, whether they were electric or if they were like halogen based or any of those other things. It was also cool to see the costuming because you got the top hats, the custodian hats for the police back in the day, and then of course the autopsy. I keep on bringing that up because they literally show him just cut off the guy's skull, pull it off, and then be like, whoa, look at the brain. Like it just plopped. And then I found out, which was shocking, in the 1890 storyline, sort of based on real events. Right?
Wait, what?
Yeah, so, okay.
I didn't even get this one.
In 1890, right? This is the reporter guy, right?
Yeah.
So his name is Henry Ash in the story, but he works for a paper called The Star. And The Star is a real newspaper that existed back then. Because I was curious how he was going to do photojournalism when photojournalism really didn't take up. Like, they used to do drawings in papers and inscriptions and stuff, but they wouldn't do, like, photos. They weren't able to show those until a little later on. So that part never made sense to me. But the Whitechapel murders were a very real thing from 1888 to 1891. In fact, the Star probably coined Jack the Ripper, who killed a bunch of women.
Oh yes, no. In fact, they say Jack the Ripper. I think even in the comics.
Yes.
So
this is slightly based on that thing, but as if Jack the Ripper existed maybe throughout time, like he's killing the same body. It also feels very much like Dark, because you've got a foreign drama. It's jumping timelines, almost 30 years each time, past and present. You've got mystery bodies appearing in parallel investigations throughout time. A kid in a yellow raincoat. I didn't mention him yet, but Saeed talked to a kid in a yellow raincoat at the mall before he met with Shahara, and she's able to determine that by looking at security photos, and it's clear that he's going to have a pretty big, like, that's her next lead. And then there's a mercurial group that is like knows about it, you know? They know about this dead body, and they're trying to prevent it from, I don't know, doing stuff.
Every single person has compared this show to Dark.
It's so much worse than Dark. Dark is an amazing show.
But well, I mean, people seem to really enjoy this show as well. Other ones,
it's like comparing a police procedural to like The Wire. Like you can't do no.
Or do you have any other comparisons? Because I have some listed here.
I have a few more pros and a few more cons. The based off true events was a pro for me, and then the place at the mall where Saeed gets shot is called Muffin Lovin'. That's the restaurant, and I really like that. I tried to look it up to see if it was real, and I couldn't find out. The cons, though, I do have a few of those. The research department kind of shit the bed a couple times with this. So in 1941, newsies were phased out. They had been phased out, I think, for decades at that point. And yet you see, to introduce you to that time period, a newsy girl. Which, again, newspaper hawkers were normally boys. But the rare ones that were girls wouldn't have existed past the 1920s because newspapers had started home deliveries by then. And that felt like it was in the wrong time period. Like they could have done that one in the 1890s as opposed to 1941. Sense, yeah. And then in 1890, the fingerprinting. So he at the autopsy thing again. Alfred has brought in the body, and he starts to take the guy's fingerprints, and the pathologist looks at him weird and is like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "You'll see, this is going to be big in the future." And it was such a corny nod because, again, they didn't exist until like 10 years later before people really pioneered that movement. And then later on, the photojournalism thing that I was talking about, where the printing press limitations for 1890 made it so that like you couldn't put images on there. And also, if this guy was taking photos of the body close up, he would have to get on the ground with his camera. And if you've seen cameras from the 1890s, if they were outdoor at all, which would be a bad idea with the lenses, they would not be moving around easily, like getting on the ground. They would be on tripods, and they would be stationary, and you would not be looking at things on the ground. And yet we're getting like a close-up view of the guy's face from the ground, and that's where you see the reflection in the mirror. And I don't think that the images were good enough back then to get what we were getting here. So that's where I thought that the research department was giving us just a lot of crap that we had to eat up. The other thing is that we live in a world of hundreds of procedurals. We've done a ton of them for the podcast. Hundreds of episodes, all trying to show dead bodies in peculiar ways, right? A guy with a gunshot wound with no bullet isn't that interesting.
But I mean, he's showing up in different timelines. Yes. That's the main thing.
But that alone in a show like this I don't think it creates enough mystery. And then you have that sinister group that causes Saeed to off himself, the pathologist to shiver in his boots, Charlie Whiteman to like work for them. It's been burned so many times. So many shows have tried to create this ominous, scary thing, and then when they finally have to define it, it comes across either corny or unnecessary or just like, show me. I'm very cynical that I don't think that they're going to be able to make it very interesting. And so why should I care? You know, I like sci-fi. I like mysteries. I like the time travel part of it. But that, and then on top of the fact that it does feel like you've got an overexposure of the same themes. Like when a show aspires to be different, because this clearly wants to be different.
Yes, obviously.
Just don't dawdle in the conventional messaging of like, oh, you've got a bad guy who's anti-Semitic, and this guy's Jewish, and your main character being the good person and the bad guy being so clearly cut. In so many ways, that's nuanced in real life. And it just feels like this show is trying to simplify it almost like comic books do. So I understand then the connection to DC. So those are my major points of...
what would you give the show overall?
5 out of 10.
And okay, so I'm assuming then you're not going to watch the rest of the
No,
series.
I'm not going to.
Okay, that does surprise me a little bit because, like I said, it's gotten pretty good reviews. 7.5 on IMDb, 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the audience score is 74%. The creator of the show, Paul Tomlin, said that he wanted to make a show that was going to give you all the answers by the end of the first season. Mm-hmm. So I know that that's always kind of what people are scared about whenever a show like this comes out.
Sure.
It does end, I think, on a note where it's like this could be the fine, like a limited series.
If it's trying to be dark, it should be a limited series because you don't want to leave it open-ended where the shadow agency could exist in another phase. I guess it's existed so long that, like, again, unless you have immortal characters besides this dead guy, right? The shadow agency has to be like generation after generation after generation of these people who've worked for it.
Well, getting into the future of the show, it was about, like, I think early last week that Paul Tomlin said that he would be open to doing season 2. And then, like, 2 days ago, he came out saying that season 2 was never in the works. It was always pitched to Netflix as a limited series. Again, it was the source material was basically going to be used up. But because the show has done so well viewership-wise, people are speculating that it could be a situation where Paul Tomlin doesn't have anything to do with season 2, but Netflix renews the series anyways.
I feel like you've said similar things about other shows recently where it's like they should come to a natural conclusion and then they're going to take it, like they're going to do a sequel to it or something.
One show you haven't mentioned, though, is The Lazarus Project, and I thought that you were going to maybe compare it
so
to
much
this.
better. The Lazarus Project, go watch that. That is insanely
The director of the first 4 episodes of The Lazarus Project is the same director who did the first 4 episodes of this.
Yeah, but the Lazarus Project tackled themes of, like, loss and what you would do to, like, bring back people and how human that can be. It's just, again, it seems like almost a procedural that has gotten just an extra twist. Like, I could have seen the storyline on Law & Order where they're just coming across this body. When the guy wakes up and starts talking, I'm sure there's going to be extra motive to want to watch this. But right now, I don't know. I just don't have that feeling yet. So that's why I'm giving it just a basic 5 out of 10. Very mediocre to me. I think it's got as many pros as it does cons. And yeah.
Yeah, C. Spencer and Dean Ormston, they're the people that created the graphic novel. I know that C. Spencer died in February 2021, and Dean Ormston I don't think has anything to do with this show, but Paul Tomlin didn't even want to create this show for the longest time before they were able to get an actor and character who you haven't mentioned yet, who isn't even in the graphic novels. And once they were able to get the actor, that's when they were like, okay, because
I didn't really recognize anybody, but I know that they're all probably very British and have done a bunch of stuff.
Well, yeah, Shira Haas, who played Iris Maplewood, her breakout role was in the miniseries Unorthodox, which came out in 2020 and will be in the next Captain America film, I think, next year.
Maybe that's her actual haircut then. Oh my gosh. Oopsie. All right. Well, yeah. The funny thing about the 2053 storyline is it's the only one right now that I don't know what the phobia is. Because again, queer storyline, anti-Semitic storyline, Islamophobia, maybe technophobes, people who are afraid of technology. I don't know.
Also, D.S. Charles Whiteman, I'm surprised that you said you don't know him because he was in Endeavor, but he was also in Strike Back, Playtowns, The Queen's Gambit, Star Wars.
Oh, no, I know who he was in The Queen's Gambit. Yeah. He was like her first crush, I think. But again, he's got a pencil mustache and he's playing older and he's playing from the 1940s. Like, he literally was wearing a trench coat in one scene. And when he went back to his car after he was put in charge of the investigation, right before he found the body in the trunk, supposedly found, but he like went back and had to grab his lighter from inside the back of the car so that people wouldn't realize it was his car. That was probably my favorite storyline out of the 4, and I wouldn't be opposed to jumping to the last episode of this
to see what
that shadow agency is all about. But it would be funny if, like, by then it's just unrecognizable, the TV show. They're all in space. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.